Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
Welcome to our Thanksgiving edition of Faith on Trial. I'm Deacon Mike Mano here with Gina No. Good morning, Gina. How are you?
Good morning, Deacon Mike. What a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend we have.
It is, and we are taping on Wednesday because we can't tape on Thursday this week. And
nobody's going to hear it till Saturday.
Nobody's going to hear it till Saturday. And this is the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And I remember exactly where I was when I heard the news, and I was something like 14, freshman over at Dowling, and it really made an impact on me, and I think that's one of the things that got me really interested, not only in history, but in politics as well, following all of that.
Can you believe 60 years later, and we still have questions about what happened that day?
Yes, and I have questions about what happened. There was a while, I read all those books, and there was a time when I was convinced that the Warren Commission was right. And now I'm not so sure. I've seen enough additional stuff that put me down as questioning.
Right, and they're releasing some interviews that were recorded in 2013 with the physicians that were in the rooms and the surgeons that were there at the hospital, and I'm shocked at some of the things they've said about how they could not question the results of the autopsy.
Well, one of the problems is they did not have doctors performing the autopsy that normally performed autopsies. Mm-hmm. They were professors or whatever, and they were not.
Wasn't one of them an ex-CIA agent?
I don't know, but here's the problem. The head of the CIA, who had been fired by Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, was on the Warren Commission. Okay.
Yeah. So 60 years later, we're still dicing and slicing the details of our poor first Catholic president.
And 10 years from now, and 70th anniversary, still going to be doing the same thing.
Such a
children
tragedy.
Will be doing that. It'll be a parlor game after a while. Who got him, who shot Kennedy, and I think Oswald was involved. I don't know if he had any help. I think that's the question. Some people say Oswald didn't do it. I think Oswald did it, but whether he had help or not, I think is...
Yeah. Did you take that course when you were at Drake? I think they had a course dedicated to it.
No.
Straight up. Okay.
No, I probably could have taught the course. I read that much about it.
That might have been an easy A for you.
It might have been. And A's didn't come easy to me in law school. So.
Well, that makes them all that more appreciated.
Yeah. All right, we've got a Thanksgiving program for you today. We thought we'd change the pace here a little bit and talk about some positive news. And so our first guest that we're going to be talking to in a few minutes is Deacon Joe Calvert of St. Christopher Parish in Randall, Kentucky. And
why would we go to Kentucky to talk to a deacon?
Because
we got a lot right here in Des Moines.
Yes, he was, and a lot of them we don't want to talk to.
No,
they don't want to talk to me. We've got very good deacons here, but this is an interesting deacon because he started out as a militant atheist.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk to him about
in the Bible Belt. He was an atheist. Mm-hmm. That seems
he was
unusual.
Well, actually, he grew up in. Well, we'll let him tell you the story. He grew up in a religious family, not Catholic, but he became an atheist, and
those are some of my favorite interviews are with converted Catholics. So and this one became a deacon even.
He converted all the way.
Dedicated his life to Christ and his community.
That's right.
Good for him.
And then we have a professor from Ave Maria University, history professor, Michael Breidenbach, who wrote a book called, I
have it right here, Catholics and Religious Toleration in Early America, right. Our Dear-Bought Liberty.
Our Dear-Bought Liberty, right. And it's been getting a lot of good reviews. It's been out for a year or so now, I think. And you've got the book right over there, and you've been reading it, and he's going to tell us all about it.
I feel like I had a mini history course over the last weekend.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about, with him, what Catholics were doing during the time of our revolution and pre-revolutionary period. And the history of Catholicism in the United States is very interesting.
It is.
One of the things that, and we were just talking about this before we went on the air, one of the things where we really became part of the American family was after World War I, because there were so many Catholic doughboys that went over to fight in the war, and they were intermingling with all these Protestants and the Jews and other people that were very suspicious of Catholics. And then, of course, there was a lot of Catholic aid over there, like Knights
supporting the troops and the civilians.
And so people came back with a little bit different attitude about Catholicism. And, of course, there was still some anti-Catholicism in the 1960s when John Kennedy was running for president. You know, he was going to be a tool of the Pope. And so...
Well, I learned a lot about why there was so much anti-Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
Our Pope wielded quite a bit of power in
He was
those
a temporal
days.
leader, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that led to some of the animosity towards Catholics, afraid they would hand over the land of America to their Pope.
Right, because he looked like he was the king of this kingdom over
He thought he was.
The Vatican States. The
From what I've read.
Yeah.
So
all
we'll
right,
have Professor Breidenbach tell us all about that
You have
today.
a prayer to open us up with.
I do. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world. Peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us all in hope, and give us the wisdom and the courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Gina. We'll be right back after these messages with Deacon Joe Calvert from Kentucky. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and with us right now is Deacon Joe Calvert from St. Christopher's Parish in Randall, Kentucky. Deacon Joe, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing just fine, thank you.
Good. I hope you're looking forward to a good Thanksgiving.
I am.
I know you have a lot of things to be thankful for.
Amen on that.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about your trip from atheism, I guess from Christianity, or a light version of Christianity, to atheism, and then your travel back to the church, and why it is now that you, a former atheist, are Catholic deacon.
Mm-hmm. Well, so, I was raised in probably a typical, 60s and 70s Protestant Midwest family in Louisville, Kentucky. And we started off Baptist and then we switched to Methodist. But it was pretty rare that we would miss going to church on Sunday. And I always went to Sunday school before the church service. So in high school, about midway through, my mother switched to Christian Science, and my dad didn't want to switch, and so I would alternate churches for those last couple of years between Methodist Church and Christian Science Church. But it didn't take long after I went to college, for me to lose my tie to Jesus. I could blame maybe, my secular education, but I can't blame that wholly because, I like to say that I was religious in a way. I was very faithful to the church of me and my own selfishness.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people are members of that church right now, if you look at society.
That's what I've heard, yeah. It was. I was taking I started off majoring in history, and I took a lot of history and philosophy, and basically what the professors were saying was that the Catholic Church was probably the greatest assault on peace for the world that had ever been. And, you could almost sum it up by saying that the Catholic Church had choked the life out of women for 2,000 years, and that it had never done anything good, and that there were, the only things of note were a couple of very corrupt popes and the Inquisition. And other than that, those were the only references to Catholicism in my history classes. And so,
no wonder you didn't like Catholics.
Yeah, I was soaking that up like a sponge, and so much so that I was, kind of working my way through college. I was working nights in Taco Bell, making, I think, minimum wage was $2.60 an hour back then. That was the, like 79 or so, 1980. So I saved up $100, which was a lot of money. I mean, I represented a lot of work, to save up that much money. And I went to the
Still does for some of us.
Yeah. And I went to the campus bookstore, and I bought every copy they had of Bertrand Russell's book, Why I Am Not a Christian. Now, Bertrand was like my hero back then, Lord Bertrand Russell, who was kind of a huge intellectual at the in between the 19th and 20th centuries in that time zone. And he was kind of the tops in the world, it seemed like to me, in both philosophy and mathematics. And I really admired that total use of, kind of the left and right side of your brain. And that's kind of where I was wanting to go. I was double majoring by then in English and mechanical engineering. And so, it was all about, building up kind of the power of my mind so that I could be the best captain of the ship out there. And I was kind of raised in a kind of an American ethic kind of way, that's kind of what a man should be, is the captain of the ship. In general, that ship being his family, but so I was, trying to prepare myself to get the most powerful brain and the most wisdom. And I looked to academics to get that. And, I would find later that wisdom was not held by academics, but was only in Jesus Christ. But it would take me a while to get there. It would take me, being unhappy. That's, you can kind of walk down that road of achieving all these things, but you got this emptiness inside that just kind of keeps coming. It keeps bothering you. And I might say, that was the grace coming through of my baptism, and that it would not be squelched. It just kept insisting that you're not going down the right road, and so. I
want to stop you right there for a minute, because I think that's an important point. When people are unhappy, it's because there's not a connection where it should be made. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we ought to keep in mind, especially when we're dealing with friends and neighbors and children and that are not happy in life, and you can tell they're not happy. And you can look around in society today, and you can see that a lot of people out there that are angry and unhappy, and it's because they're missing that important connection.
Yeah, that's right. And so, which is, like why we should, be real careful before we judge people and the path they're on, because they may be on the right path according to God's plan. It just doesn't look that way to us. Mm-hmm.
Right.
They may be kind of suffering through a necessary step that they have to take before they...
All right, and that's important to look at, too, yeah. Suffering sometimes comes from God, too. I mean, look at Padre Pio.
Yeah, so I was looking for truth, and but, the last place I would ever expect to find it would be in Catholicism, and so I went to the Eastern religion. And I, really kind of started with Hinduism and then Buddhism, and really started meditating in a pretty faithful kind of way, 20 minutes twice a day, and, just going kind of very deep into that. And I was doing that one day, and all of a sudden it just sort of came to me. I can call it, the Holy Spirit. It's not a physical voice, but it's a strong meaning that comes through in an insistent way that said, you will never be happy without Jesus Christ. And it was so strong that I knew I couldn't deny it. Denying it would be denying integrity. And so I was like, oh, no, you mean I'm going to have to change? I'm going to have to start going to church on Sunday? But so I did, and, but I was going, started off with kind of like the most liberal church I could possibly find, kind of a church that accepted just about everything. They had every book in the universe, every religious book you've ever seen, except for anything about Catholicism. I think we're the kind of unapproachable or people just don't want to go there.
Yeah, we're the ones your mother warned us about. Yeah.
And I think it's because, it's the biggest threat to our pride. Conversion means you have to say you've been wrong about some things, and you have to say that this other thing was right. And so I was, just super hesitant to go down that road because I had quite a bit of pride. I thought I was a pretty highly educated guy. And it was a series of things, ending up in a church looking at stained glass windows of the corporal works of mercy that were depicted from ancient scenes, and I had to ask myself, do you mean the Catholic Church was doing good things for the poor, like way back, like in the 200s, the 300s? I mean, well, I wasn't told about that. How come I don't know about that? And then I started reading, really at the prompting of a Hindu kind of meditation scholar who really loved these poems of St. Theresa of Avila, and I started reading her things, and I thought, well, here's this nun in Spain. That's like the worst place at the time of the Inquisition, and she is splitting with joy. Here is this towering intellectual woman who loves, absolutely adores the church. And I thought, that's in total contradiction to what I've been taught about the church choking the life out of women for 2,000 years. So I credit St. Theresa quite a bit with my conversion and the Blessed Mother as well. I had a kind of miraculous thing happen with the Blessed Virgin that might be a topic of another thing. But she kind of hit me in the head with a 2x4, we might say, to get my attention, and so I couldn't detract from her anymore. And for most converts, the last two things to fall are accepting, devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary as the Mother of God, mm-hmm. and accepting the authority of the Church. Mm-hmm. And they were the last two things for me. And I went to, I was looking for the truth, and I saw that there was going to be this retreat on the Blessed Virgin Mary at St. Meinrad Archabbey in Indiana, and I signed up for it. It was 2.5 days, and it was going to be 8 lectures by a priest there on the Virgin Mary. And I went there to find holes in the bucket. I went there to find, ways that would finally let me check the Catholic Church off the list. And I found myself not being able to object to anything that priest was saying about the Blessed Virgin Mary. So that obstacle fell away. And then, I was kind of raised in a Planned Parenthood household. I mean, my mother used to give us Planned Parenthood brochures when we were teenagers. And I was pro-choice, but John Paul II had just come out with this encyclical, The Gospel of Life, and so I read it, and I couldn't find anything that wasn't logical in what he was saying and straightforward and truthful. And so I had to admit that he was right about that and that I'd been wrong about abortion. And so And I found myself saying, I don't know. I said it. I don't know if I believe in this Pope stuff, but if there were such a thing as a vicar of Christ on earth, he would write just like that. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you say something like that, you're on all it takes a feather to push you over the edge. Mm-hmm. And my objection to the authority of the church, it just couldn't stand in there in the light of the beauty of John Paul's teaching.
Did you run across the catechism?
The catechism?
Right.
Yes, I did. In fact, just before that was one of the steps was that I read the catechism. It was just coming out as a new book, and I thought, oh, good, this will be great. It'll tell me exactly what the church teaches, and not
an owner's manual.
Yeah, and not kind of all these things that you would hear different Catholics say, which contradict each other. And so I was like, okay, good, this will be the official. And I read that book from cover to cover, and I was like, man, there's no holes in that. There are no logic gaps here. There's nothing here that I can object to.
Deacon, it's interesting that you point that out, given the catechism. We've had guests on the show that are converts or atheists or non-religious who are scientists who studied the catechism in their area of interest and realized that, wow, why am I doing this? The church has already figured this all out. It's all right here, laid out perfectly for me to use in my science. So it's interesting that you say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're reminding me of about 4 years ago when one of my aunts passed away, and she was, lingering there at the point of death in the hospital, and the doctors were giving the family, kind of a list of the hard choices there at the end, and about how much care should be extended and all those things. And so my wife is Catholic, but my sisters are not, and and kind of that the people outside of the family, that kind of relations are not, and they're mostly anti-Catholic. But at that point, they all looked at me and they said, "What does the Catholic Church say?" And I told them, and it was a great relief to them, because in some way, even though they kind of didn't like the church, they knew somewhere deep in their heart they did respect the authority of the church.
I kind of know what you're saying, because I've ministered to a lot of people, and at one time I was a chaplain at a drug and rehab center, and so there were a lot of non-Catholics there. And I remember when they were sick, especially I remember one case in particular where the man was dying, and I went to his bedside, and they were not Catholic, and the whole family was there. And as soon as I walked in with the collar, everyone stood and stood silently as I went through the commendation of the dying with their loved one. And the respect they had at that point in time was something that still stays with me as I continue to minister to ill people. All right, so you made this conversion. Now, what made you decide to go all the way and become a deacon? Now, I know it wasn't the pay.
It probably started immediately after my confirmation. I had this feeling that I had talents and I wasn't using them as God would have it. And so I got a spiritual director. She was a wonderful sister of mercy, Sister Mary Naomi Bunniff. She lives in Cincinnati now. And she immediately said, well, start making this consecration to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And do this every day, and it'll come to you, what you need to do. And so I did, and it was, within 9 months, here I had been, like pro-choice like a half a year before, and within 9 months I was on the board of directors of Right to Life in Louisville,
That's a conversion story, yeah.
And I was, just very involved at the church with a lot of things, and there were a lot of people saying, hey, you ought to be a deacon, and it started kind of got me thinking about it, I suppose. And, you can't really regard people's comments as the call, but on the other hand, you can't say it's not part of it.
I know that my own story to the diaconate was the same way.
Yeah.
People saying something to me, and finally there was that one that was the feather that knocked me over. That I said, maybe I'm hearing something.
So when I come to an issue that of decision that's, to me, momentous in a big way, like something like that would be, I find that the best approach is to go to adoration and try to be like that insistent widow and just keep begging the Lord for the answer. And just like, I'm not going to quit until we get the answer here, whether it takes months or whatever, but you just do that. And so I would go every day, and I would be there before the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament and just asking him, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And one day it just came through super clear. It was like, be a deacon, but be Mary's deacon, or don't be one.
Wow.
Yeah. So when were you ordained?
So I was ordained in 2008.
Okay. A couple of years before I was. And you have seniority over me now. So
kind of the interesting thing about that sort of message there was 3 years ago, the Archbishop appointed me to be the director of the Marian Committee of the Archdiocese of Louisville.
There you go.
And I mean,
she got what she wanted.
That's right.
Well, I think it's what the Lord wanted, so we just had a meeting of the Marian Committee last night. I think we're gaining momentum, and our goal is to increase devotion to Jesus through Mary, and so I think we're making inroads there, and good things are happening.
Well, we're happy you made the conversion, and you're on our side of the road anyway, the Lord's side, and it sounds like you're doing very well, and we appreciate your time today. I know you've got, what your schedule is today. You've got some traveling you have to do with some people, so we'll let you go so that you can go do that. But we do want to thank you for joining us. We loved hearing your story, and we want to wish you continued success and blessings in your diaconate and what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Deacon Mike and Gina, and I wish you all the richest blessings as well.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very, very, very much. Yes, have a happy Thanksgiving, Deacon Joe Calvert of Randall, Kentucky. Thank you very much for joining us, and Gina and I will be right back after these messages where you're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we have with us right now Professor Michael Breidenbach, who is a history professor at Ave Maria University, and he has written an interesting book, Our Dear Bought Liberty, Catholics and the Religious Tolerance in Early America. Professor, thank you for joining us today, and happy Thanksgiving tomorrow.
It's my pleasure to be here, and happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you. All right, Gina is starting to page through the book right now, and she's got a lot of questions, but let's start with the genesis of the book.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it and why you wrote it and why you were interested in this particular topic in history.
Well, I grew up Catholic in America, and I had always seen the visual between both sides of the altar, the American flag and the Holy See flag that stud a lot of our parishes across the United States. And I began to, after graduating college, began to wonder about these dual allegiances, right, our American and our Catholic identities. And I began to study American history at the University of Cambridge in England, and so I had some distance from my time in the United States as an American, and I began to look at these identities in a new way. And I found that a lot of what we see in terms of our visuals, the stories we tell about ourselves, there wasn't always a place for American Catholics at the founding. We always hear of American Catholics in the 19th century and in the 20th century with John F. Kennedy. But what about that earlier story? And what I knew about American Catholic history was that American Catholics were often persecuted for their faith in early America. Obviously, the exception being in Florida, where I live, and St. Augustine, where we have a Catholic settlement by the Spaniards. But what about the original 13 colonies, places in New England and the middle colonies? We often think of them as being persecuted. And what I wanted to uncover is, how did we get from having Catholics being considered dangerous subjects of a king, right? Papists who are perfidious, who are going to lie and overthrow the government and that sort of hysteria, to a place where we can have a Catholic president, where we can have Catholic Supreme Court justices, Catholics in Congress, and in all walks of life. And so the book is sort of an answer to that question, how Catholics became American.
Okay. All right, so tell us, how did Catholics become Americans?
Well, the story begins really in Maryland, when we have the first Catholic settlers come from England to a new colony founded by a Catholic revert called Lord Baltimore, George Calvert, and his son Cecil Calvert.
Now, it's kind of interesting to talk about Calvert. We just talked to a man who was a deacon in Kentucky, and his name is Calvert. I don't know if it's the same family or not.
Joe Calvert.
Calvert, right, yeah. Calvert. And he went through a long litany of religions before he finally found Catholicism. So he wasn't born a Catholic, but it's kind of interesting that we have, we're talking about Calverts today in both sections.
Well, if he is indeed related to the Calvert family of the Lords Baltimore, it's certainly an illustrious lineage. These Englishmen grew up Catholic, but because of the English Reformation, the Protestant Reformation in England, the family was actually forced to at least outwardly conform to the Church of England. And in the case of George Calvert, a schoolboy, he was forced to go to a Protestant school, forced to give up his Catholic books, his Catholic version of the Bible, and outwardly conformed. So he presented himself, at least publicly, as a Protestant, which allowed him to go to University of Oxford, and ascended the ranks of the civil government in England, going up to the highest civil position one can have, an advisor to the king. But then, at the height of his political career, he reverted back to his Catholic faith, and that meant he was out of a job. Mm-hmm. But the king found him such a loyal subject, despite being a Catholic, that he gave him this plot of land called that he called Maryland, which was named after the king's wife, Henrietta Maria. And so what we find here is that the first sort of beachhead for the English colonies for Catholics was Maryland. It was not an officially Catholic colony, but it did mean that Catholics were allowed to settle in that colony with some religious toleration. And the Calverts made sure that Catholics there would be welcome, would have full religious toleration, along with Protestants. So long before we have toleration in England and in other European countries, Maryland was a sort of a vanguard, a kind of a pioneer in religious toleration.
Now, as I recall, at the time, the colonies, many of the colonies had an official religion, official
That's right.
church.
Yes, and Maryland is distinct for not having a robust, established church. By the Maryland Charter, it does say that Maryland conforms to the one true religion, but it doesn't say what that is. And so there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of room for flexibility for this Catholic ruler of this colony to allow both Protestants and Catholics to live side by side. And so what we get from the Maryland Toleration Act in the 1640s is the first systematic, comprehensive religious toleration law in early America. It's quite exceptional, and that's by the hand of a Catholic.
And I find it so interesting. I just kept reading the book in terms of the constructs in Maryland and thought, when I learned American colonial history, I feel like we focused more on maybe Virginia and Rhode Island, and I went to Catholic school. Why did they not tell me this?
Well, this is what I'd like to correct, because I think when we think about religious minorities immigrating to the New World, fleeing from religious persecution, establishing a small settlement, these people later contributing to the founding of America, framing its laws and its Constitution, in our minds, we're thinking Protestants.
Right.
And
Puritans even.
That's right, Puritans and Pilgrims. And what my book shows is that Catholics were also founders and framers of this country. And that needs to be put into our history, put into our textbooks. Rhode Island is not the only colony of religious toleration. And in fact, it's not the first one to have the first comprehensive systematic law concerning toleration. And so this needs to be corrected in our history textbooks, especially in Catholic schools, I would say.
I would wholeheartedly agree after reading your book. The other thing that was interesting to me is I did not learn about this oath of allegiance and denial of the papist authority.
Yes, so the English oath of allegiance was enacted in 1606, 1 year after a Catholic and his co-conspirators tried to blow up Parliament, effectively. And this started a whole slew of anti-Catholic sentiment and this law that required public office holders and anyone else who has tendered this law to swear this oath of allegiance. Now, part of the oath was something that I think any Catholic at the time could swear, which is that they believe that the king is the rightful king of their territory, and that they will show due allegiance to him and his heirs and successors. The other parts of the law, or this oath, were more complicated because the king wanted anyone to swear that they also believed it was a damnable doctrine and heretical to think that the Pope can excommunicate the king and therefore absolve oaths to the king. That the Pope could intervene in the affairs of other countries like England. Now, popes previously had exercised that kind of authority in certain circumstances. For instance, a pope had annulled a law, the Magna Carta in England. The Pope had excommunicated Queen Elizabeth. And so these kings and queens were concerned about the way in which the Pope was intervening in the affairs of England, especially now that England is Protestant. And so what the King James, who had the same one after whom the Bible is named, he wanted to, as he said, separate good Catholics from bad Catholics. Now, the Pope said that any Catholic who signed this oath would be excommunicated. So these are not great options for English Catholics.
Put them in an awkward situation, yes.
Very awkward. And indeed could be perilous because you're either considered a would-be traitor or potentially excommunicated, depending on which you chose. Now, very few people were tendered this oath, in the grand scheme of things. But one type of person in particular would be very concerned about this oath, namely anyone who wanted to settle in the New World, because there were people scanning the docks of London looking for people boarding ships to America. And they tendered this oath to anyone who wanted to sail to America. And you can kind of see their point, right? If you're going to sail all the way to, this new territory, you want to make sure that they're still going to pledge allegiance to the king and not create, a separate country eventually. And so,
as it turns out.
And so this presented a singular challenge to the Catholics who wanted to join the Calvert's new plans in Maryland. And so what I found in the archives in London is that the Calverts wanted to figure this out, right, in a kind of legal way. And they were trained as lawyers. They were politicians. And so what they ended up doing was just basically taking out the clauses about the Pope, suspending it in a kind of holy ambiguity. Let's not talk about it, right?
Right.
And incredibly, that oath withstood the test of the king and the Maryland Assembly. In other words, everyone could agree not to talk about it for the time being.
Kind of like people are going to do around the Thanksgiving table tomorrow.
That's right.
We're not going to talk about this.
So it allowed Catholics to have a place where they were allowed to continue to maybe have a papal allegiances and still an oath to the allegiance to the king.
That's right. As a recent convert, the Calverts did not want to face excommunication from the church they just joined. At the same time, they wanted to continue to pledge, as they had before, when they were Protestant, allegiance to the king. Now, I did find in the archives that the Calverts, in fact, were not very supportive of the Pope's intervention in English affairs. They believed, like later Americans in the Revolutionary period, that this should be, kind of free and independent from any kind of political intervention by the Pope. On the other hand, they did believe that the Pope had certain ecclesiastical powers, right. And so did their bishops. And so this was a very complicated church-state tension that they tried to resolve by simply saying, trust us. We will swear this oath in allegiance to you. We will show our loyalty by growing this colony in your name. And we're not going to be involved in, any kind of plot or separatist movement or something like that. But don't force us to swear an oath that the Pope says we'll be excommunicated for. So that's how they solved it.
So, and jumping forward, then this development of theory and implementation in Maryland brought us to a point where we, as a country, thought that was the best way of having that separation of church and state.
Yes. The separation of church and state has been much abused as a term because oftentimes it's used in the way that sort of secularists wanted, which is no religion in the public square. Religion is in the four walls of the church, and that's about it. That's not the vision of the founders, and that's certainly not the vision of the Catholics at the American founding. What they wanted was, yes, a free and independent United States, but one that worked cooperatively with people of faith and with religious institutions. So to bring us to the next important family, the Carroll family, also of Maryland, John Carroll was the first Bishop of Baltimore. His brother, Daniel Carroll, was a framer of the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. And their second cousin, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, was famously the only Catholic to sign the Declaration of Independence, and was one of the senators who was in the finalizing committee for the First Amendment. So quite an illustrious resume.
And the last
yes.
surviving signer of the Constitution.
Yes, and the Declaration of Independence, someone who lived to be in his 90s. So quite an impressive and wholesome life. Mm-hmm. And what these Catholics wanted was a kind of cooperation rather than a strict separation. one in which, the ecclesiastical authorities were in their own sphere and the political authorities were also in their own sphere, but that they could actually interact. So let me just give you one example to kind of illustrate this. When John Carroll was thinking about constructing his what became the Baltimore Basilica, the cathedral in Baltimore for his episcopate, he commissioned the same architect that had redesigned the U.S. Capitol. His name was Benjamin Henry Latrobe. And Latrobe gave two designs for Bishop Carroll to consider. One was a kind of neo-Gothic design that Latrobe preferred because he thought it was better in conformity to the Catholic churches he had seen in Rome and in Europe generally. But he also gave a kind of neo-Roman design that was much more aligned to what the U.S. Capitol now looks like. And Bishop Carroll chose the one that is most like the U.S. Capitol. So that's what we have today in Baltimore. So you have the Roman and Greco-Roman columns. You have the dome at the top. It's all very reminiscent of Greco-Roman architecture, like you find in the federal city of the United States.
Right, as compared to the structures with the spires and the points and the crosses.
That's right.
Now, Professor, I've got to warn you here a minute. Gina has a daughter that's living in Florida, and I imagine she's going to show up in one of your classes one of these days when she goes down there for a visit.
Well, you'd be very welcome.
Yeah, your book is, I have so much to say about it, and we only have 20 minutes, but I learned quite a bit about America and a lot about my Catholic faith. I had no idea that the Pope had so much temporal authority across the whole globe.
Just as an aside, and I've heard this before, and I don't know if it's true or not, I imagine you can tell me, that when George Washington was president and there needed to be a bishop appointed in the United States, the Pope contacted President Washington, and asked for recommendations. And Washington turned him down and said, "No, that's your job, not mine."
Yeah, the story is very similar to that. It was actually Benjamin Franklin, who was in Paris at the time. And a papal nuncio, a representative of the Pope, was in Paris and asked Franklin, whether Congress could approve of a bishopric in the United States. And Franklin said to him, well, the Congress has no authority in such matters. And this took the papal nuncio aback because every European country that's Catholic wants to have a say in who's bishop and so on. And so the papal nuncio insisted. And so Franklin dutifully wrote to Congress, and Congress said, in really the first statement by Congress about church-state relations, it said that Congress has no authority in matters purely spiritual, reserving that to the states. Mm. And so this is, one of the first remarks about church-state relations, and something that continued, I would argue, in the First Amendment.
Okay, now, if I can get you to move forward a couple hundred years, what is the relationship today, as you see it, a historian?
Well, I think there's, a kind of continuous base note here in American Catholic history that continues today, which is that American Catholics, like Americans generally, do revere the First Amendment, especially the religion clauses, right, pertaining to their religion. That they don't want the federal government or even a state government to have an established church. And oftentimes they'll cite practical reasons for this, right? It can be bad for religion, as well as could be bad for the civil government. And so we have, these Catholics who, two of them, Daniel and Charles Carroll, at the committee that finalized, this very important first freedom, as we say. In terms of the reconciliation between the Catholic Church and, let's call it, modern society in America, obviously there's always been some tensions and some flashpoints. This was particularly true in the 19th century when there were waves of European and Hispanic immigrants coming, and it was religious but also ethnic and racial and socioeconomic biases against these Catholic immigrants. Today, I think Catholics are very well assimilated in American society. Vatican II obviously created the conditions for American Catholics to give documents in support of how the Roman Catholic faith can be compatible with our great documents like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, especially on religious liberty. I'm thinking of Dignitate Humanae in 1965, the Declaration on Religious Freedom. And yet there still are tensions. I think the debate over our second Catholic president and so-called Eucharistic coherence is just one of many examples in which we find American Catholics disagreeing among themselves, and then also sort of official Catholic Church teaching at odds with American civil law on several very important issues. And so the tensions continue. And I think if this history tells us anything, it's that American Catholics have the resources to continue to contribute to this country in ways that are not threatening, but in fact leavening. And I think at the end of the day, it's really individual Catholics, obviously in full concert with magisterial teaching, that are really the leaven for society. I don't think if one thing we can take from this history is that the individual initiatives and evangelization efforts of individual Catholics and their organizations, whether it's religious organizations or nonprofits, really were the catalyst for a lot of good social, political, and economic change in the United States. Catholics really did shape this country, as other religion groups did, but we've had a kind of outsized importance given our numbers and the kind of institutional support that Catholics have through the Church.
The book is Our Dear Bought Liberty. Where can we find this?
You can find it anywhere books are sold. Amazon, obviously, the Harvard University Press website, which is the publisher, Barnes & Noble. And so if you just type in, Our Dear Bought Liberty, I think you'll be able to find a copy for the holidays. And
you have a web page up, I think, promoting your book.
Yeah, if you want to learn more about the book, watch the trailer. It can be found at michaelbreidenbach.com.
Very good. I want to thank you, Professor, for joining us today. It was an interesting discussion, and it was a nice, happy discussion as we're going into the Thanksgiving Day holiday here. We certainly wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
And I look forward to the movie.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very good. Professor Michael Breidenbach, Professor of History at Ave Maria University. Thank you very much for joining us today. God bless you. And we recommend the book to anybody that can read it.
Thank you very much.
Certainly. God bless you. All right, we will be right back after these messages. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio Network. Gina?
All I can say is a quote that Deacon Joe Calvert, our first guest, made. He's becoming Catholic. He said, "How come I didn't know about that?"
Yeah.
I think that's true for both of our guests
the book.
today.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Send them the book. Send them the book. There's a lot of things we need to be thankful for this weekend coming up. And one of the things that at least we are thankful for, are our sponsors. And the people that help support this program, especially Imogene Ingredients and Paul Mitchell and Paul Martin over there. So that's one of the things that we're thankful for. We're thankful for this show that we've had on for 10 years now or so.
Well, the whole yes, the whole Iowa Catholic Radio organization. It's a great service to all of us as Catholics in Central Iowa.
Yeah. All right, we're pretty much out of time, so let's close with our Defender's Prayer. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. That's it for this week. Don't forget our annual dinner Friday, December 8th at the Embassy Suites in Des Moines. Dr. David Anders from EWTN's Call to Communion. Tickets are on sale now, and you can get those through the radio studio here. Just go to our website, iowacatholicradio.com. So until next week, have a blessed and peaceful week, and make sure you go to church this week and take your kids. And have a happy Thanksgiving with your families.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial, with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.